Well, good morning, everybody. Got a wonderful speaker here for us, coming all the way from Tucson, Arizona to talk to you, and I know she'll do a great job and provide us some entertainment. So, again, glad you're here. Thanks for coming. We're waiting on a few people, so they may come in a little bit late, but I want to go ahead and get started. So today's agenda, basically, we're going to talk about some end-of-the-year planning deadlines and some tax law updates. I know everybody's kind of wondering about that stuff. We'll talk a little bit about the markets and some reporting things we're doing, some technology updates. I've got a special gentleman here today to talk a little bit about healthcare and what's happening there, as I know that's on a lot of people's mind as well, and kind of what those options are. And then we'll have our guest speaker. End of the year planning deadlines. This is kind of a critical time of the year. There's basically time's running out on a few things that you must have done before the end of the year in order to be able to do it. Probably the biggest one is required minimum distributions. So basically, if you're 70 and a half or older in 2017, then you have a 2017 RMD due. We've been working real hard getting a hold of everybody, and we're still in the process of doing that. So with money that we're managing for you, we're helping you meet these deadlines and meet the required minimum distribution. But you also have to understand that if you have money elsewhere, you may have to do that yourself, or we can help you if you let us know about it. But again, just make sure that if we haven't got a hold of you yet for this, we will be. But again, if you have money elsewhere, you want to make sure you meet that requirement, because there's big penalties if you don't. So if you have any questions on that, or you're concerned about it, or wondering just to make sure it's all taken care of, let us know, and we'll make sure we talk to you about it. Retirement plan contributions. For personal accounts like IRAs and Roth IRAs, we got until next mid-April to contribute for 2017. But for retirement plans and employer-sponsored retirement plans like 401ks or 403bs, you've got to have that in by the end of the year in order to maximize your benefit. So if you're still working and able to contribute to an employer-sponsored retirement plan, you've got a few more days left in the year to maximize those contributions out if you need to, or at least contribute enough to get the employer match. So make sure you're aware of that, because again, end of the year deadline for those. A lot of people here like to do some gifting to qualify for some tax benefits. That has to be done by the end of the year to qualify for 2017. So make sure you get that done if you're wanting to do some gifting. Also, what's called the qualified charitable distribution is one thing about required minimum distributions that you can do. So if you do have an RMD due that you really don't want to take and claim as income, we can talk to you about how to give that to charity so it doesn't count for income and you get a tax deduction for it. So that may be an option. I'm a big fan of doing strategic tax planning moves to become more tax efficient. Our ultimate goal as a client is to get as tax efficient as possible over time, and hopefully some point down the road be in a position where we're tax free. We just met that requirement for a client this week, where we did some moves the last several years, and they're finally in a position where they won't pay any tax at all the rest of their life. So it's a good thing. But that all involves making tax efficient moves each and every year. So again, that has an end of the year deadline. So we have to make those moves before the end of the year. Roth conversions is one of those big things that we can do sometimes. So for instance, if you're in the 15% tax bracket, and we know you're never going to be any lower than that, we want to make sure we maximize that out by making a Roth conversion to maximize that room in that bracket. So again, we've been trying to work with everybody on this. If you have questions on that, or you're wondering if you should make a tax-efficient move and we haven't talked yet, make sure you get with me or Michelle, and we'll get together and do it. But that goes hand in hand with the tax law update. So everybody here knows that we've been in the last 6 months or so, President Trump's trying to get a tax bill through. And, of course, it passed the House, and then late last night, it passed the Senate, so in all probability now that's going to go through. And that's probably going to be a good thing for the overall economy, especially for businesses. But on a personal side, it's going to help some of you and it's going to hurt some of you. It just depends on your individual situation. So basically, tax brackets are going to go probably from 7 different brackets down to 3 or 4. So the tax code will be simplified a little bit. But the main thing on the personal side is they're going to get rid of a lot of itemized deductions. So for people in the room that itemize right now, probably going to hurt you. But they're going to increase the standard deduction up. So again, how it relates to you individually, we'll just have to sit down and go through it and figure out if that gives us an opportunity to make some bigger tax efficient moves, or if it's something we're going to have to do some things different to save you some tax dollars. So again, we don't know for sure exactly what the bill says yet in its final version, but something's going to be passed, and we'll just have to, as soon as it is, we'll have to figure it out and see how it affects you individually. So we'll be working with you on that. I don't think it's going to be passed and made retroactive for 2017. I'm pretty sure it'll be effective for 2018. So again, 2017's tax rates are set, and that's why we're working with you on doing what we need to do for this year. But next year it's going to be different. We'll just have to see how this new tax bill affects you personally, and hopefully that'll bring up some additional opportunities for us to get more tax efficient. Because again, it's not a permanent tax. It's not tax reform where it's made permanent. It's a temporary tax reduction, if it is a tax reduction for some people, and that'll change in the future. And I still firmly believe that in 5 to 7 years, tax rates are going to be much higher than they are today. So with this new tax bill, I think it's an opportunity for a lot of people to even do more tax efficient planning to take advantage of it. So we'll be working with you on that. Stock market, obviously it's booming. It's been doing great since President Trump got elected, but we all know this type of pace can't keep up. So, most of the accounts are performing very well, taking advantage of this right now. But again, the reason we do use the models we use is because they will adapt when things change, and that's very good. So again, everything's going good right now, and hopefully that'll continue for a while. Many people think with the passage of the tax reform bill, it's going to make things even go better. The tax bill, the market's already had that factored in, so I don't think it's going to take off and even do better than it's doing now. In fact, now that this is probably out of the way, I think you'll probably see things start to calm down a little bit in the markets, and things will probably start getting a little bit more volatile. But again, that's the reason we're in what we're in, is because it'll adapt when those changes come. So that's a very good thing. Again, this is very important for you to pay attention to. This is the weekly market condition update. Goes out to you every Monday, sometimes Tuesday morning, depending on how long it takes me to put it together. But again, please make sure you read this, even if it's just a quick glance at these two indicators. It takes you 5-10 seconds to look at this, but this tells you basically kind of where we're at in the market. So as long as the arrows are in the green here, we're pretty safe, and the market's doing good. If you see this indicator here, kind of over here in the yellow and red, and you see this get up in here to the yellow and red, that's when market conditions are changing. And so again, with money that we're managing, you don't have to worry about it because we're making those adjustments for you. But money that you have elsewhere, you want to make some adjustments when that happens. And that's going to happen at some point. We're going to get up here in the risky areas again. So for instance, if you have money locked up in a 401k that we can't manage yet, or some other places, that's when you need to make some changes to that. So again, just pay attention to this each and every week. Take you real quick just to glance at it and read it, because that'll be a lot of your indicators of when we need to make some adjustments. We've been working hard on improving the monthly reports that you get email from us each and every, at the end of every month or beginning of the next month for the previous month. We've been adding the outside accounts like insurance policies, annuities, CDs to those reports. Most people's have been done. We're still getting a few of them put together. So on your monthly report, if for some reason you're not seeing all your accounts on there yet, let Michelle and I know, and we'll make sure we get it resolved. But for the most part here, most of you should be seeing all your accounts on your monthly statement now. And I did make another adjustment last month where it'll have a pie graph now of kind of how all your money is divided up in the market. So it's just another little graphic that'll help people kind of understand some things. But we're constantly trying to improve the monthly reports, and if you have any questions on that, let us know. Technology updates. We did get a new logo. I think we had it maybe last year too, but it's still pretty new, and we like that. We're making some constant changes to the website as well. It was due for a refresher, so please check that out. We've got a lot of good information on the website. The radio shows on the website. The article I write every week's on the website as well. Please check that out. That's always good information. We've added some training videos to the website where I've done some video work and talk about some special things, so check those out. And I've also committed a part of my time to what's called the Prepare Institute. The Prepare Institute is a nonprofit organization that specializes in teaching college-style retirement classes throughout the country. And basically, I do a lot of traveling and basically teaching these classes, and they're very informative, very good for people out there, because I'm a big believer in education, and we want to make sure people have the proper information for retirement planning, and that's not really something that people learn in college or through their employer plans. It's much needed, and so I'm happy to do that, and we've got some things on our website about that. So doing some good things with technology. Okay, healthcare. Obviously been in the news, and a lot of changing happening here. Obviously it's very expensive. We're still waiting around on hopefully something happening soon where it'll reduce some costs for people. But obviously it's on your mind, and it's a big item. And we've been trying to help people with this, and I realized several years back that we can't really do healthcare in my practice because you got to have somebody who does it basically 24 hours a day. So we've hired a specialist. Many of you have talked to him in the past, seen him before. He's been here before. He's been helping us out part-time. Well, it just become time when we needed to bring him on full-time and have him on staff to help our clients with this, because it just continues to get more complex, more cumbersome, and as people come on board, become clients. You know, we're getting some younger people now, and as you get older, you've got some choices to make for supplements and other things like that. So he's desperately needed, and I'm glad to have him on board. And I'm going to have him come up and talk a little bit today just about the latest updates on what's happening, some of the Medicare deadlines that you may need to know about, and we'll go from there. So Brian Bell is here, and I'm glad to have him come up and talk a little bit, and he can answer some questions for you if you have some questions about healthcare. So Brian, come on up. It's your show.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning. So back to the first slide, number 3 was gifts. So if you're looking for someone to gift money to, I tell my wife I'm my favorite charity. So I'll be happy to accept any of those gifts, because my 23-year-old son seems to think that he's our favorite charity, and we're trying to change that a little bit. So Brian is right. I'll tell you, I've been in this business now for 23 years, and it's never been more complicated from the health insurance side of things. And that doesn't matter whether you're self-employed, you're a kid who's under the age of 26 on your parents' plan, you're working for a major corporation, or you're over the age of 65 and dealing with Medicare. The environment that we're in right now is really changing rapidly and very fluid and very dynamic. The bad news is that on the under 65 health insurance, on the group side and the individual major medical side, there isn't a lot of optimism for what they're doing in Washington, D.C. right now in terms of remedying the problem. And so that continues to be problematic for Americans. And the reason it's become more problematic is that we're seeing financial exposure for people during their working years that we've never seen before. And so now when we start talking about not only health insurance, but also the employee benefits that you may be eligible through with your employment, it really is a difficult decision to make, but it's a really important decision to make. And so That's where I'm going to be helping Brian and his clients because this is one of those things that it's not a fix it and forget it situation. It's also when you get that, if you remember when you were working or if you still are working and you get that packet in November or October when it's time to make your annual elections for your benefits. People normally do what they did last year, right? And that isn't always the thing to do. And so it's very interesting to watch people go through this exercise. My oldest son is 27, and my wife and I were talking to him just earlier this week about, that's the season now that we're in for choosing your employee benefit elections for next year. Have you gotten your packet? Oh yeah, I think so. Okay, what did you do with it? I don't know. How about sending it to your dad and letting him take a look at it and help you get through this? So people don't understand how dramatic, these decisions are. Same thing is true for other types of insurance coverage. When we talk about your property and casualty insurance, this is starting to fit in with an overall financial plan as well. And when you talk to Brian or come to the classes, he takes a holistic approach to financial planning. That includes everything. It doesn't just include what's going on in the market. It includes your health insurance. It includes your employee benefits. You may have some sort of a valuable item in your home that is part of your overall retirement plan that you're going to liquidate at one point in time and turn it into cash for retirement. If that item is underinsured and something happens to it, then there goes part of your retirement plan. So what we're trying to do is just bring those things to people's attention, answer those questions, and help them through it. The good news for retirees is that Medicare is on pretty stable footing right now. You're not hearing any politicians or any winds blowing about making wholesale changes to Medicare. And frankly, it's not broke, okay? Is it full of fraud and waste, and can it be approved? Absolutely. But it's not broke. So we're not seeing people, legislators saying there's a need to raise the rates. But there are, needs with regard to the insurance carriers to manage that block of business, if you will, those types of plans and coverages effectively, because medical inflation is definitely outpacing, regular inflation. So it's part of what, we have to deal with. And one of the things that's really interesting is an article that I have here in my hand written by Fidelity. And there's some copies of it out there on the table. I don't know if I brought enough for everyone, but my contact information is there. I'd be happy to email you a copy of it. I would really encourage you to take a look at it because Fidelity is doing some interesting research about healthcare. And when the study first came out in 2012, I believe, it went something like this. Retirees that retire, a couple that retires at the age of 65, the perceived normal retirement years, and lives another 20 years is going to be expected to spend $225,000 of their assets on health care. And when I read that, my first reaction was, yeah, right. But I started out with a legal pad and a pencil and started doing the math and realized, that's not far off, or maybe it's low. And now, 5-6 years later, the number is higher than it was 5 years ago. And the thing that perplexed me was, why in the world is Fidelity doing this? Where's their angle in this game? And I've realized that, where do you think the money was coming from? Where do you think the $225,000 was coming from? It was coming out of retirement accounts, which is what they do. And so this article, although written by a competitor of ours, is really impartial evidence of that this is something that people need to be dealing with and thinking about. And so I would encourage you to pick it up. If there aren't enough copies, get one from me. If you Google the title of the article, How to Tame Healthcare Costs When You Retire, you can find it online and read it there as well. So I'll close with that, and basically open it up for any questions that you may have. We don't have a lot of time. I want to get the headliner of the show here, who we all came to see this morning, up here on the stage. But if there's any, immediate questions that are just too burning to let them go, then I'll answer them right now. But afterwards, I'll be around and we can take it from there. Yes, sir. So the question is, a friend or a colleague of his has recently retired and was presented with an opportunity to purchase coverage or be provided with coverage that didn't cost him anything, but didn't maybe have some of the benefits that are associated with what we think in terms of normal products that we typically purchase, which, by the way, are prescription drug plans, Medicare supplements, and then also Medicare Advantage plans. So I would have to sit down with him and meet with him to see exactly what he was presented with. There are a lot of things that are, that are out there. There are these religious health share organizations, which are basically co-ops now that you can participate in, which is, the idea is traditional insurance. Everybody pays some money in, and some people take, the claims out, and some people don't. It's not regulated insurance. It doesn't really work in concert with Medicare. But, one of your options with regard to Medicare when you become a Medicare beneficiary, as they call it, is to not purchase any of the supplemental coverage. You can have original Medicare, as we call it, and just Parts A and Parts B, hospitalization, and then the outpatient procedures. You don't have to have the supplements. The problem is that there's exposure there, okay? And so most people don't want that financial exposure, and they purchase supplemental insurance to cover that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other things that are out there. I'm seeing group retiree medical plans that are available to groups of 1 or 2 people with very reputable companies and that have been around for 29, 30 years doing those types of things. I don't know exactly what he was presented with, but the issue is much like investments, when you sit down with Brian, is what's my risk tolerance? What am I going to be exposed to financially if I get sick or hurt and need care versus what's it going to cost to insure that risk? So, I don't want to say it's a misconception that you have to buy a Medicare Advantage plan or a Medicare supplement or a prescription drug plan. I just think it makes good financial sense to do that. Any other questions? Okay, thanks.
Well, thanks, Brian, for that. And again, I'm glad to have him on board full time. He'll be spending some time in the Kokomo office. He'll be down in Indianapolis in those offices a lot as well. So again, if you have questions for Brian, you can get a hold of Michelle and she can set up a time or call him directly. He's got some business cards back there. I forgot to give you a couple personal and office updates. Some of you know Pat, who handled the front desk at the Indianapolis office. She has officially retired, so glad for Pat. She's able to do that. We're in the process of maybe getting somebody new for that position. So some of you have come in the Indianapolis office, haven't seen a girl at the front desk. That's why. We've added another staff member in the Kokomo office. Her name's Debbie, and she's here today. Debbie is going to be helping Michelle out a lot and handling some of those responsibilities. So you'll be talking to her sometimes when you call into the main office. So welcome, Debbie. I'm glad she's with us. Personal, real quick. I know some of you have asked questions about my family, and my wife's here today with me, and we've now officially got 3 teenagers. It's hard to believe. Chase is our youngest, and she's heavily involved in track and swimming. My son, Avery, he's a sophomore now and still playing all 3 sports, trying to figure out if he wants to continue to do that or focus on 1 or 2. And, of course, my daughter, Brooklyn, she's a senior this year, and we're in the process of doing some college visits and trying to figure out where she wants to go to school. Her top choice is Butler, and she got a dance audition there in February, so she's hoping to get into the dance program. But also trying to figure out if she wants to venture out and maybe go a little further away. So we're going to, I think, go to Western Michigan next and a couple others on her. So we're doing the college trail right now. So that's taking a little time, and 2 of them are driving now. It's a little stressful in the house. So In fact, my son just called because he just started driving, had to drive to basketball practice this morning, so I had to make sure he got there and home okay. But again, thanks for asking, and that's kind of our updates. So let's have some fun now. I've got a great guest speaker here all the way from Tucson, Arizona. Becky Keeker is a nationally known author and guest speaker for her commitment to how to basically have a healthy retirement. And she's kind of known for her talks on storytelling and humor. And I've seen her a couple times, and she does a wonderful job. So I'm glad she's able to make the trip and be here with us today. So please give a warm welcome reception to Becky Keeker.
Thank you, Brian. Isn't it amazing how I'm following the Medicare? This is not the look that I had in mind when Brian asked me to come several months ago to talk with you today. But before I just want to thank you, Brian and his team for bringing me from Tucson up here to speak with you today, and thank you all for showing up. I mean, 9:30 in the morning and you're all here. I just am really excited, so I better be pretty good, shouldn't I? If you got out of bed and chose your morning to come here, I'm very impressed. Before I get into my formal presentation, I just have to tell you a little story about what happened to my leg, because it is definitely a senior story. 4 months ago, I had a hip replacement on my left hip. And I'd already had one before when I was 57, so of course I was so knowledgeable and so informed about everything. I knew exactly what I was getting into and doing. And you know, hip replacements really are not that bad. I mean, you can get through them okay. So I have this wonderful surgeon who's only 45, and he looks like a young Tom Selleck. So of course I had to pick him. But anyway, I went to talk to him, and I said, you know, I want to be the poster child for hip replacements. I want to do everything and get through everything seamlessly and quicker than anybody else has ever done. And if I do that and I behave myself and I do well, will you write something up in a medical journal about me? He kind of eyed me up and down, and he said, well, I guess I could do that. He said, I don't think that's been done before. I said, well, then you have got the right person. I'm going to be doing that. So I went to the hospital that morning, had the hip surgery, and I had a spinal instead of general anesthetic so that I could come out of it quicker. And 2 hours after I was back to my room, I was already up with my walker, zipping down the hall to therapy. I was doing great. I was stopping to talk to the nurses, the orderlies, other patients, anybody that could tolerate the wonderfulness of how I was doing immediately after surgery. The next morning, you know, because Medicare sends you home immediately now, the doctor came in, he said, oh my gosh. He said, I had no idea that you were really this serious. He said, everybody's just been telling me all these wonderful things, and nurses have glowing reports, and he said, so you know what, I think we've got a deal. He said, you keep this up and I'm gonna write a paper about you and submit it. I said, great, I'm there for you, and I just happened to have the right picture, the one you saw, for you to put in the medical journal with me. And so the other thing that he said was, I don't really think you need to go to prescribed physical therapy outside your home. And he had a big binder with him. He said, here's a binder with all of the exercises that you need to be doing, and I think because you're so ready to do this, that you can do all this by yourself. And you will promise me that if I give you this binder, you will do that. Well, shoot, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm going home. I'm the poster child for this, remember? I'm going to get this through in no time at all. So I took the binder and I went home that afternoon and started doing some exercises, and then I went through the week and I was like, well, gee, these are nothing. I'm gonna skip to week 3. And then I did week 3 and I got bored with those. And so by the time I was 2 months in to after my hip surgery, I was doing 4-month exercises. And a couple of the exercises were, you had to walk on your heels across the floor, and then you had to get on your tippy toes across the floor. Well, what I did not realize at the time, but I have come to realize the hard way, is that when you were born with really, really flat feet and no arches, that's not a good thing for you to do. And I was supposed to be doing 3 of those exercises, each of those exercises a day, 20 times for each foot. I decided 200 was better. So I was doing 600 a day for about 4 days, and then my left leg started to hurt really bad, and my ankle started to hurt really bad. So I called the doctor's office, and the nurse said, "Oh my gosh, you probably have a blood clot. You better go to the emergency room." So I went to the emergency room, fully expecting a blood clot. They took x-rays, didn't show anything. Then they did an MRI, and I had torn all the tendons in my leg, and my foot had collapsed over onto the floor. So my point to all of this is the doctor came in to the room, my orthopedic surgeon, who was obviously, pardon the expression, but pretty pissed when he walked in the door. And he said, "I just saw your MRI. Are you out of your mind?" And I said, "Well, no." He said, don't talk to me, because now I am going to write something for the American Medical Journal on what not to do after you have a hip replacement. So that's my hip replacement story. Before I retired, which has almost been about 5 years ago, I was a partner in an commercial architectural and interior design firm in the St. Louis area, which was our headquarters. And we had offices in Tempe, Arizona, and another office in Shenzhen, China. So I was responsible for marketing and business development. And of course, business development meant that I was the rainmaker. And so I brought in all the money to the company. And I traveled all the time, all over the United States, and then back and forth constantly to China. So I took my job very seriously because we had a lot of people to feed and a lot of things that we needed to do. And about the time I turned 60, one of my partners took me to lunch, and she said, "Becky, for heaven's sake, you are so serious all the time." She said, "If you don't learn to laugh at trouble, you'll have nothing to laugh at when you get older." Well, I can tell you, in the last 4.5 years since I retired, I've done a heck of a lot more laughing than I ever thought I would do in my entire life. I was 69 years old when I decided to retire and close that work-life door and become the happy retiree. I was going to have a life like no other. The day after my retirement party, I got up in the morning and I went outside and I got the newspaper, and I stood there looking around at all my friends and neighbors who were jumping in their cars and taking off to work. And it suddenly dawned on me that they were going to be spending the morning with people they probably didn't like all that much in meetings. They were going to go to lunch with a vendor that was trying to sell them something that they didn't want. And then in the afternoon, they were going to spend their afternoon reorganizing the same department that they just reorganized 6 months ago. And it was like an epiphany. I didn't have to do that anymore. But you know, sometimes that grand plan that you have, that special plan, leads you to a cliff. And those that have been much wiser than I have said, it's how you handle that free fall off the cliff that makes all the difference. 2 years later, after I retired, I was not at all emotionally prepared for what I was experiencing or for the emotional roller coaster that I was feeling at the time. Along this journey, my husband, who was still working and still owned his own business, and I experienced many things during my first 2 years in retirement. Some funny, some silly, and some that we did not see coming, that developed many bruises and bumps along the way. But what we did discover is that if we could survive me writing a book about some of our innermost problems after I retired, then we could probably survive just about anything. And I'll tell you in a couple of minutes why I wrote the book. When I finished the first draft of the book, It was 189 pages long, typed. It was pretty thick, and I was pretty impressed with myself because I had put everything in there that every retiree should know before they retired about how to do all kinds of things, and especially how to handle the emotional side of retirement. So the first thing I needed to do with the first draft was, of course, give it to my husband to read because there were so many personal things in there about him, about both of us. One Saturday, he took the book, he went into our bedroom, and he closed the door. And he was in there for 4 hours. I thought, what the heck? This isn't Gone with the Wind. Come on. I paced the hall. I went out to the kitchen and started putting dishes away. And I got so desperate, I actually got the vacuum cleaner out. When all of a sudden, the door opened. He came down the hall into the kitchen, and he took me into his arms, and he whispered, "You got some splaining to do, Lucy." And that necessitated a 4-month kind of edit and rewrite of some of the chapters that he did not particularly find interesting. So why did I write the book? The first part of the book was dedicated to some of the financial issues that happened to my husband and I, especially when we were young. My husband and I grew up in poverty with families that had very modest jobs, little savings, if any, and absolutely no idea what to do about retirement. Relatives took care of relatives, and friends and family back then, of course, were helped with any kind of needs that we had. We were both the oldest in our family, so we had a different perspective of our childhood than our siblings did, but we experienced the worst of times living in poverty, and we were both committed when we met not to repeat the same cycle of poverty from which we came. Needless to say, there were no conversations about money in our families, other than when we were both in high school, we were told we needed to make sure we graduated and go out and make some. Early in our married life, I was working full-time, and my husband was working 2 jobs, and we were still living from paycheck to paycheck. We didn't know anything about money, and we just didn't know what we didn't know. Well, then something happened in our life that changed our perspective about that. My grandmother, who was a widow and had received a $100,000 life insurance policy after my grandfather had died, had to move in with us because she had actually run out of money. That changed our lives forever. And we made it a priority on how to put together a financial retirement plan for the future so that we would never end up like my grandmother. After talking with Brian, and as I mentioned, Brian hired me, about 3 or 4 months ago to come today to talk with you. One of the things that I have noticed is that he is a great communicator, and I think what he proposed today to you, just spelling out all the things that you need to do, is something that's very different when you deal with advisors today. One of the things that I was most impressed with, that when Brian sent me his first email, there was a quote on there, and I'm not sure if it's an ongoing quote, but I just absolutely loved it, from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it says, "It requires a great deal of boldness and a great deal of caution to make a great fortune. And when you have it, it requires 10 times as much wit to keep it." And if you really think about that, that is so incredibly powerful. Because what my husband and I learned years ago when we were putting together our financial plan is that you absolutely cannot build great wealth without a Brian to guide you up and down the slippery slope of investments. And obviously, he is doing a stellar job of that. Now, this is the part of my book that most women and some men like the most, the emotional side of retirement. And as I've just said, you need a secure financial plan, but what I was not prepared for was that you also need an emotional playbook after you retire. Because as we have all learned after we've retired, that retirement is not for sissies. So it kind of startles you when the first thing I received from AARP after I retired was I needed to go online and take a virtual dementia tour. I wasn't quite there yet, so I thought I'd pass on that one. Hundreds of men and women who have read my book have contacted me and said they like the emotional side of retirement chapters the best because I was brutally honest about what I went through. And I did some pretty stupid things. Because you know, after we retire, it's really the last frontier. Everybody thinks we retirees are living the life O'Reilly, we have more money than God, and that we are living the good life. So what could we possibly have that could be emotionally upsetting? Many, many men, which I have been very surprised, have contacted me constantly about how they feel about retirement. And I think a lot of the wives bought the books and then forced their husbands to read them, which will probably happen today with the book that you're going to take home with you. But a couple of quotes I'd like to read you. The one man, he retired from Wells Fargo a year ago, good for him, before everything hit the fan. And he said to me, "Interesting book, Becky. My wife and I have stuff on these issues. Kudos to you for opening up so much about your personal life to help others. Just as you said, my wife and I now keep bumping into each other around the house now that we are together all the time. And strangely, just as you suggested, sometimes the bumps are pretty hard." Another man from Cleveland said he developed the Charlie Brown philosophy. He only dreads one day of retirement at a time. That's why, you know, after I'd heard this saying years and years ago, Malcolm Forbes said, retirement kills more people than hard work ever did. And I didn't know what that meant until after I retired. And then I realized that everybody has a little sorrow, a little anger, a little darkness, and a little pain inside them. Yes, I did get that from a country western song, but we all know who Blake Shelton is. Excuse me. So mixed into my first 2 years of retirement, I had the emotions that ran the gamut to high and low. And I decided that the first thing I needed to do was find a new outfit to dress in, especially when my husband was away or out, and I could seclude myself in the house. And that was the name of the book, Hiding in My Pajamas. My pajamas consisted of this lovely silk set of pajamas. Excuse me. Lovely silk set of pajamas that one of my daughters had purchased for me. It had little pink bunnies on them. And then I had this robe. It wasn't too shabby, but it wasn't quite the greatest. And then I had also pink Elmo slippers that one of my grandkids had purchased for me 2 years before as well. That was my outfit. And the robe had very deep pockets, which I kept filled with Dove chocolates. And I would walk around the house endlessly eating chocolates, which resulted in my nice little figure that I had when I retired quickly disappearing into the robe and my pajamas. I started out by using a hairbrush as a pretend microphone, running around the house all day long, kind of like Footloose with Tom Cruise, singing to old Elvis Presley CDs. And then the next thing that happened was before I retired, I really did not have any time to do what I called recreational reading. And so I was always reading, you know, Architectural Digest and all kinds of magazines and proposals and so forth, so I didn't do any really casual reading at all. And at my retirement party, I received a Danielle Steele novel. Okay, I see some ladies smiling in here. I fell in love with Danielle Steele because there's nothing not to like about her. They're steamy, they're sexy, they all have happy endings, and I just fell in love with her. So I went to every Goodwill and thrift shop that I can find, and I totted home 80 books to read. And I would lay in my pajamas and read Danielle Steele for weeks at a time. I absolutely just thought she was wonderful. The next thing I found was one of my daughters called and she said, "Mom, now that you have nothing to do and you didn't have any time to watch television before, you need to have Netflix." Well, I didn't know anything about Netflix, so they got Netflix for me. My son-in-law came over and hooked it up. And I was like, oh my gosh, Doris Day, Rock Hudson, Cary Grant. They were all there, all the people that I grew up with and I loved. And I watched so many reruns of MASH and Seinfeld, I think that I could recite verbatim every episode to you today if you absolutely wanted me to. But the last thing I found, the pièce de résistance, that also kept me in my pajamas and on my laptop, was Overstock.com. Do you know how many things there are on Overstock.com that you never knew you needed before? The UPS man was at my house at least 3 times a week. He is still a friend to this day, and we exchange Christmas presents. In all fairness, I think this started because society has such a dim view of retirees. There are so many outdated stereotypes about what is expected of us and what we should or should not be doing. You know, the night that I had my retirement party, I took home a whole stack of those over-the-hill retirement cards, and I was laying in bed reading them. And guess what? I didn't think they were near as funny as that I thought they were when I gave them to other people when they retired. Because, you know, aging is sort of like society's big contradiction. It's somehow perceived as we failed because we've gotten older. I have to admit, though, that it is true as you age, your memory just kind of loses it. That's why I have notes, so that I'm on track and I'm not wandering away into some oblique thing that you're not interested in hearing about. So a couple of months ago, I was at Costco shopping, and I got a call from my youngest daughter, who actually moved from California to Arizona to be closer to us now that we're getting older, okay? But anyway, I picked up my cell phone and I said, "Hi, sweetie, how are you?" I said, "I'm at Costco shopping. Is there anything that I can get you and take home and drop by your house on the way?" Silence. Finally, she said, "Mother, we drove here together and I'm standing at the door waiting for you." Felt like a complete idiot. So by society's norms, at 69 when I retired, I was considered old by pretty much everybody else. And after running around trying to get my head around the retired pack of old people that everybody considers us to be, I decided that I wasn't going to put up with stereotypes. About a year ago, but society doesn't end there. You know, no matter what you think, society still thinks the things about you no matter what you do. About a year ago, I had a CAT scan, and you know, after they shove you in the little thing and they bring you back out on the table, then they have electronics that brings the table down. And as I was coming down on the table, and it stopped, I thought that I was supposed to get off, but it wasn't all the way down. So when I got off the table, I kind of fell down on one knee. And I wasn't bad or anything, but all of a sudden I heard somebody say, "Oh my God, that little old lady just fell down and she's probably hurt." And as I was getting myself up off the floor, I thought, "Oh my gosh, somebody must have really had a fall." And then these 3 nurses come running over and pick my sorry butt up. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, they're talking about me." Recently, my husband and I were standing in back of a couple that were getting ready to go in to purchase tickets at the show. And when the wife stepped up to get the tickets, she says, "I want 2 senior tickets. One for me, who actually admits that she's a senior, and the other one for the guy in back of me that doesn't." And it reminds me of when my husband and I turned 65. And I was so excited. Our birthdays are only 2 months apart. I was all excited because I said, "Let's go to Denny's so we can get the senior discount." And my husband was like, I'm not saying anything. I'm not getting the senior discount. I don't look old enough to be 65. I'm like, okay, I'm telling her I'm 65. Well, we went to Denny's and we ate breakfast, and the girl never said anything. We never said anything. When she brought the ticket over, guess what? There was a senior discount on there. I thought my husband was going to die. He went track down that waitress and he wanted to know why she thought he was 65. Well, she was 12. That's why she thought he was 65. And then you have my mother-in-law, who lives in the St. Louis area in a retirement community, is 93. And she called me in Tucson not too long ago, and she said, Becky, I'm still getting these letters every year for jury duty. And they want me to they want me to drive downtown to the courthouse to fill out another exemption form. And she said, didn't you do that for me last year? And I said, yeah, I did. I said, let me call the city clerk and I'll take care of it. So I called the city clerk, and she looked up my mother-in-law's records, and she said, yes, she did fill out a form last year. I said, I know, I did it for her. So I said, why does she have to fill out another form this year? She's 93. Well, that's the law. She has to fill out another form. And I stopped to ponder the logic of government again, like we all do on a daily basis. And I said to her, is the government under the impression that she's getting younger somehow? Gal didn't get it at all. Then I had this little story about my grandmother who lived with me until she passed away. And one day I was getting ready to go to work, and my grandmother came out of her room and she said, before you go to work, do you have time to take me to the bank? I have a couple of checks I need to deposit. And I said, well, okay. I said, I can do that. The bank's only 2 miles away. And when we went out to the garage to get in the car, she said, would you mind if I drive? Now, she was 75 then. I said, no, as long as you're careful, go ahead, because she really wasn't supposed to drive anymore. So we get in the car, and she backs out of the driveway, and everything's fine, and we're going down the street, and she runs a red light. And fortunately, nothing happened. We go down the next street. She runs another red light. And we finally pull into the bank, and I was just white-knuckled, and my heart was in my throat, and I said, Grandma, do you realize that you just ran 2 red lights? We could have been killed. And she looked kind of startled, and she turned around and she looked at me, and she put her hand on her heart, and she said, oh dear, was I driving? I listened to an interview last year about a woman from London. I was watching BBC, and she just turned 104, and the reporter said, what do you like best about being 104? And without a beat, she looked into the camera and she said, no peer pressure. So that is my new goal. Now that I'm not going to be in the American Medical Association catalog, I want you all to see me in a few years, 104, and nobody else is older than I am. But there is some other funny parts about retirement that kind of aren't exactly quite funny, but it seems everything you did and everything you were disappears after you retire. My husband, who is still employed, we still go to cocktail parties and not-for-profit functions and all that kind of stuff. And when I was newly retired, just a few months, and we'd go to parties, and I would go around and network just exactly like I did in my business, and I would go up to people and introduce myself, and they'd say, what do you do, Becky? And I'd say, I'm newly retired, I'm so excited, and their eyes would glaze over, and they'd pat me on the shoulder, and they'd go on to find somebody more relevant. So I learned just to stop telling people that I was retired, and I started making up stuff to make other people happy. About a year after I was retired, my husband decided that he needed to have his knee replaced. So he was going to be in Tucson full-time several months and put his business kind of on hold to do that. And the day of the surgery, we went in and we checked in, at the business office, and there was this lovely young lady behind the desk, long black hair, blue eyes, just so cute. She probably was 14, but she was a doll. And as she was going through the paperwork, all of a sudden, she started talking to both of us in this very slow, measured voice. Mr. Keeker, do you understand the procedure that you're having today? Mr. Keeker, do you know what knee you're getting replaced today? And finally, I held up my hand and I said, whoa, wait a minute. Are you somehow under the impression that both of us are senile or hard of hearing? Ruffle, ruffle with the papers. It says here you're over 70. Then, what I also realized after a year was that I needed to, moving 1,600 miles from the St. Louis area to Tucson, I needed to have a whole new medical network. So I found an internist, and I set up an appointment, and I went to the office, and I filled out the 35 pages of useful information that nobody looks at, and finally got into the exam room, and there was another 14-year-old lovely young lady in there that was taking my blood pressure, my temperature, and drawing blood. And she was looking at the front part of the paper that I filled out, and she said, "Mrs. Keeker, I see you don't take any medications." And I said, "No, I'm so lucky I don't." "Would you like to open your purse, dear, and see if there's any medications in there?" No, I wouldn't. And when I would get upset about this, my husband would just say, "Think about who you were and what you used to do and all that you've gotten accomplished in your lifetime." The "were" part was what drove me crazy. How could you close the door on your work life, and the simple part of it is that part of you actually disappears to society? You've worked all your life to get where you are and what you've been doing, and the silence after you close that door is very personal in a whole different way. So the third part of my book is the part that my husband took big exception with. How does retirement affect your marriage? He didn't like that part too much. As you know, as married couples, or if you have partners or significant others, there's always tensions. It's just eternal. Someone told me years ago that a perfect marriage or perfect partnership is just two imperfect people refusing to give up on each other. And I think that's kind of what happened to us. And I remember that that's what Irma Brombeck said years ago. "You know, honey, there's no guarantees with marriage. You want a guarantee, you better buy a car battery." And truthfully, marriage does change you as well as what you want out of life with your significant other. My husband has a client that turned 95 last year, and I was back in the St. Louis area in September with him. And she doesn't drive anymore. She's in assisted living. And he went to see her at her request, and she told him that she was getting married in October. And he was like, "Okay, that's great." So he called me on my cell on the way back, and he said, "Becky, Rose is getting married next month." He said, "Would you please call her and take her to lunch because she doesn't have any family, and see if there's anything we could do to help her with the wedding?" And I said, "Sure." So the next day I took Rose to lunch, and we were talking and got ordered and everything. And I said, "So tell me everything that you can about your fiancé. I'm so anxious to hear about him." I said, "Is he good looking?" "No, not really." I said, "Okay, does he have a lot of money?" I don't think so. We haven't talked too much about that." I said, "So you're just madly in love with each other, is that it?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, Rose, for heaven's sake, why are you getting married?" Well, he was 7 years younger than her, and he still drives. So there's compromises for everything. My husband and I were high school sweethearts. We met our junior year of school. So we've been together as a couple almost 60 years, long time. And after I retired, I thought, of course, there isn't anything we don't know about each other. But after I retired, I found out that there was a lot that we didn't know about each other, and that AARP tells us there's actually a honeymoon period after you retire. Unfortunately, it's not like the first one, but there is a honeymoon period. And they have a whole article on it from last year. It's called Out of Sync Retirement Syndrome. And the article says, many couples are poorly prepared for the conflicts unleashed when one partner retires and the other continues to toil. So I retired and my husband continued to toil, so unleash we did. What I learned is that as a couple, you have to establish all new working relationship boundaries and have to create structure to fill your days because you're spending all of this time together. Even though my husband lives in Tucson with me, he still goes back and forth to St. Louis to his office all the time. And he's gone about 10 days out of every month, but he's still there with me 20 days, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He's there with me. So I kept thinking, because we were having problems, that we were really in serious trouble and that we needed to sit down and have a talk. And every time I wanted to have a talk, my husband just kept saying, oh my gosh, estrogen hour, I don't want to hear this. And after he said that 3 or 4 times, I thought, okay, I'm done. I'm giving him the silent treatment. I'm not going to talk to him for a week. He's going to be so sorry that he did this. So we just kind of went around and, you know, that last Friday, the last night of the week, we were sitting there eating dinner and quiet. And he just was sitting there beaming and kind of looking at me, and he said, I don't know what's happened to our relationship, but isn't it just working out great? You guys are all laughing at that. Then the following week, I had to take him to the doctor's office because I knew he wasn't feeling well. And of course, like most of you guys, he won't ever make his own appointment to go to the doctor. I had to do it. So we go to the internist, and he fills out the paperwork. And when we get into the doctor's office, the doctor's laughing at the first page. And I said, what's so funny? And he just handed me the page, and I read it, and it says, what is the reason for your visit today? You guys all say it, because my wife made me come. Yeah. I didn't think that was too funny. It just never dawned on me that our identities are so closely linked to who we were and what we did at work that it's just hard to adjust to life outside the workplace. And after I moved to Tucson, I moved down there an entirely different person. Because here I was now going from my 70 and sometimes 80-hour weeks flying all over the world in the position that I had to having all the free time in the world. And we had bought the house that we have in Tucson 7 years before I actually decided to retire. So, you know, it was set up, everything was great. And I decided, you know, I used to be a good cook. So I gotta start doing some gourmet meals again because I hadn't done that in years. So I started doing some pretty heavy cooking again. And then because I had all this free time, it was my decision to no longer have a housekeeper. And I started cleaning house. Well, I should have remembered what Phyllis Diller said years ago. Housework can't kill you, but why take the chance? Now when I get really upset about my house being too messy, I just flip on an episode of The Hoarders, and I watch that for about 15 minutes. I think my house is okay. I became focused on what I thought my husband wanted me to do because obviously he was still working full time, and here I was, you know, with nothing to do. In other words, the old guilt just started to work its way in. And I believe that after everything that I was doing, the gourmet meals, the cleaning the house, the being the beck and call girl, that he would be loving and appreciative. And when he wasn't, I just got mad when my needs, I thought, were not being met, and I felt drained having to give what I thought was so much of myself. When he was in Tucson, I would get up in the morning, I'd go out and get the paper, and I'd make coffee while he was reading the paper, and then I'd fix breakfast, and then after breakfast, I'd clean up the dishes and clean up the kitchen and go around and do some other things around the house. And then all of a sudden, like a puppy, he was whipping back into the kitchen again, asking me what was for lunch because he had a 1:30 tea time. Every time he was back in town, it just seemed as if he was visiting the hotel that I was running and that the kitchen was always open. It seemed to me that I was constantly grocery shopping for the 3 meals a day now that I was providing. I mean, we went out occasionally and did things, but most of the time I cooked. And it became a chore and was no longer creative or fun. So right or wrong, I felt like I'd become a lesser person of the person that I had thought I was. All I wanted to do was slap an out of order sticker on my forehead and call it a day. I thought it was wonderful for him. Here he was jet-setting back and forth from St. Louis to Tucson, and here I was stuck in Tucson having my private little pity party feeling sorry for myself. But what I also learned, that doing this and him going back and forth and dealing with an unhappy wife was also taking a toll on him. Years ago, I remember Jack Benny said that he and his wife had been married for 48 years. And during that time, not once did they ever talk about divorce. Murder, yes, but never divorced. Because what I discovered very early on in retirement when my husband was home, when you're together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sitting in your newly purchased leather recliners that vibrate, looking at each other like strangers in a stranglehold over the remote. It's pretty daunting. And the other thing I learned, because neither one of us had much time to watch television, you guys don't care what's on television when you have the remote. You only care what else is on television as you're flipping the remote. Some women have said to me, I can't even imagine, as much as I love my husband, spending 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with him because we're just different people. And you are different people after you're retired. A new friend that I met in Tucson last year was a circuit judge, and her husband is a very powerful political attorney, and he was flying back and forth from Tucson to Washington, D.C. all the time. They'd been married for 35 years. They didn't have any children, and their careers had been everything to them. But they both very suddenly decided to retire at the same time. And she called me and she told me that they were getting ready to retire, and she said, do I have any advice for them? And I said, I'm just going to give you a copy of my book and you read it, and then let me know what you think after you've been retired for a while. Well, 4 months later, she called me in a whole different voice and said, we need to have lunch. So we had lunch. And she said, Jim is following me around the house all day long, talking constantly. I cannot get him to just be quiet. And she said, he's even telling me how to cook, and he's never even been in the kitchen and knows what a pan or how to boil an egg or anything. She said, it's driving me crazy. And when I'm on my computer, he's standing over my shoulder, either asking me what I'm doing or telling me how to do it. And she said, to make matters worse, he actually did a time and motion study on how I clean house. I've had it. And if you really think about it, she said, all I want him to do is just to go away and leave me alone and shut up. So that is the daunting thing, I think, after you retire. That is what I found is the best kept secret about retirement today with men and women who retire, because retiring is a huge challenge to all of us who have had constant validation through significant power and recognition. Finding that emotional balance between the two of you it just takes work. One of my closest friends told me that she's getting ready to retire in 2018, and she doesn't know who she's going to be. She said, I don't know who I am. I don't have any identity outside of what I do, and I've never had any hobbies. And that's what happened to me, because I spent my entire life taking care of other people. And most of the women in the audience I know will all agree with me. You take care of your family, you take care of your children, you take care of your clients. That was a big priority for me because that's what brought in the money to our firm. You also take care of your co-workers, and in some instances you even take care of your boss. So after you retire, who are you and where is your identity as a person? So what I think is that couples need their own playbook, and they need to discuss it about how they're going to live together after they retire, and that needs to happen at least 5 years before the retirement. There's a woman that I mentioned in the book whose name is Kathy Stevenson, and she wrote a book called Retire Now. And she says if couples haven't addressed their marital issues prior to retiring, they will surely confront them after. No longer able to retreat to work and family, many couples find they cannot resolve issues that have been hidden for years. And that's kind of what happened to us, because if you really think about it, for 30, 40, however many years you've been in the workforce, you've been separate but equal. You each go to work during the day, you do your things, and you come home and you deal with family matters, and you're really not talking about the touchy-feely things or the emotions. I didn't think I had many emotions until after I retired. I guess I was keeping them all bottled up and they just kind of spilled out. So when I had all these feelings of loss and insecurity, I just lashed out, blaming everybody but me. So 2 years after I retired, I finally had something that pulled me out of my slump. The doorbell rang one afternoon and I thought, great, I bet it's Charlie bringing me my next Overstock.com package. And I went to the door, and it was Charlie. And he handed me the package, and he was standing there looking at me kind of funny, and we've been he'd been my driver for a while. We were friends now. I said, "What, Charlie, what? What are you doing? What's the matter?" And he was looking at me and he said, "You might feel better if you combed your hair." And I slammed that door in his face and I huffed on up into the bedroom and I looked in the full-length mirror and I thought, oh my gosh, I hadn't washed or combed my hair for 2 days. My robe was pretty much, after 2 years, just a solid mess. I had a mustard stain on my pajamas where I'd eaten a hot dog for lunch, and my Elmo slippers had holes in them. And I thought all I needed was a cart, and I could go out and be a bag lady all afternoon, and everybody would recognize it. So you can only do the avoidance technique for so long. And I said, "Becky, it is time for you to pull up your Spanx and man up." Because I remembered what John Wayne said, courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. So I saddled up and I haven't looked back. What I challenged myself to do, and what all of us should do, is to discover who I was and being happy with who that was. What I needed to do was discover the best version of me. And so I wrote the book to help not only solidify that in my own mind, but to share my experiences with others. From the first day that my husband and I were married, he would always say to me, "Honey, don't get so upset with everything. Everything's going to work out. We love each other and everything was going to be fine." And he was right. I did tell him that one time, that he was right. But after I'd written the book, a friend of mine and I, who have known each other for 45 years, and she's known my husband and I for 45 years, she said, "Well, wait a minute, I read the book and there's nothing in there about you and Gary being prickly and argumentative." I said, "Whoa, are we prickly and argumentative?" She said, "Yeah, you have this funny way between you that just kind of, sometimes it's irritating, Becky, but you should have put it in the book." And I remembered when we were younger, my husband was never good about buying gifts, for birthdays or Christmas or anything like that. But he would always buy me T-shirts that he thought were funny, that had funny sayings on them. And when I turned 40, this was the big saying at the time, "Warning, I have an attitude and I'm not afraid to use it." And of course, back then I had a bigger attitude because I was younger, and I wasn't afraid to use it. When I was 50, the one that he thought was hysterical and everybody else did, but I didn't think it was so funny, was "I'm still hot. It just comes in flashes now." But the T-shirt that he did buy me that I liked the best is the one he bought me when I turned 70. And it says, "I'm out of estrogen and I have a gun." Now, for the women in the audience who are a little bit older, that estrogen thing sailed a long time ago, so that was true. But the funny thing about the gun is that the first thing I did when I moved to Tucson was I bought a gun and I got my conceal and carry permit. So now I'm locked and loaded and he's in trouble. We are prickly and argumentative, but it seems to work for us. In fact, we're finding all kinds of new ways to get together as a couple again and trying to work out a life that is happy for both of us, because he's a big golfer and he golfs all the time. And that became an issue, and now we've worked that out. But one of the other things that we've worked out, and this is not uncommon, I'm sure a lot of you in here do this as yourselves, is we've decided we would have 2 date nights a week, one on Tuesday and one on Friday. Those are the big senior coupon days for me, so I like those days. But he gets to pick one day, and he gets to pick the venue that we do, and I can't complain about it. And then on the other day, I pick the venue, and if I want to go to a fancy French restaurant and go out to see a chick flick, he has to go, and he can't say anything. So it's working out really well. A couple of weeks ago, on his date, we went to Home Depot to buy a Comfort Height toilet. And then we went to Chili's for dinner. It was the highlight of my week. So we're trying to keep alive in our marriage the things that make us feel alive between the two of us, and it's working. Many people tell me how lucky I am to live the life that I have today. And as I look back over the last 50 some odd years of hard work and sacrifice that it's taken us to get to this point in our life, it doesn't feel lucky. We are blessed, my husband and I, to have what we have and to live in Arizona. and our life is fulfilled and rich. There's no question about that. But I can tell you honestly, not one thing in our life would have happened, or we would not be here and financially secure as we are without the plan that we put in place in our early 30s. And I know that that's what Brian is working with for you. And lastly, before I close, I want to just talk about something real briefly that is new, is not new, but pondering our own immortality. I haven't thought much about death or dying, but when I was home, my mother-in-law said to me, at 93, she can't imagine why she's still alive, because so many friends and relatives, of course, have already passed away. So she asked me to come to her apartment so that we could talk about some of the things that might happen after she passes away. And I said, sure, fine. So I brought my little notebook. I'm all prepared to write things down. And she said, oh, honey, I'm not worried about the details. There's just some other things I'm worried about. So we chit-chatted about that for a while. And then she got tired and she said, you know what, I'm going to lay down and take a nap, and then we can talk about it later. And I said, okay. And so I settled down with the book, and it wasn't 2 minutes later. She said, Becky, come in the bedroom. I forgot something I have to tell you. It's urgent. So I went into the bedroom, and I leaned down, and I grabbed her hand. She said, whatever you do, don't let me be buried in plaid. So that's my new mantra now. I told my husband, don't let me be buried in plaid. Sitting on the back porch of our home not too long ago, I had a friend that sent me something that Jerry Seinfeld wrote a few years ago about life in general. And I'd like to share that with you because he's my new go-to funny guy, since all of the old funny guys, Johnny Carson and all the rest of them, have all passed away. And he said, life is truly a ride. We're all strapped in and no one can stop it. When the doctor slaps your behind, he's ripping your ticket and away you go. As you make each passage from youth to adulthood to maturity, sometimes you just put your arms up and you scream at the top of your lungs. And other times you just hold on so tight to that bar in front of you, you just never want to let go. But the ride is the thing. I think the most you can hope for at the end of life is that your hair's messed up, you're out of breath, and you didn't throw up. Well, I'm not out of breath too much, and I haven't thrown up lately, and usually, unlike today, my hair is usually a mess. But I think that is a good part of life. And I'd like to close with just one new thought. You know, as children, we are brought up to be delighted. We come into this world with all kinds of non-expectations other than we want to be thrilled and delighted at every turn. But as we get older, that openness tends to fade. So even as I know that I have slowed down at 75 and my memory wanders, that's why I have all these notes, I'm taking time to embrace the wonder of expanding time, expectancy, forgiveness, and love. When wonder comes knocking at the door, I want to be there to open it and to embrace it and let it in. May all of you experience the wonder of this holiday season in your soul and in your heart. Thank you so much for being here today and coming out to see me. You've been a wonderful audience. Have a great holiday season.
Well, thank you very much, Becky. Really appreciate you being here and sharing your stories, and it was very nice and entertaining. We really appreciate it. Again, please give Becky a warm reception. And Becky's, again, she referenced her book a lot during her talk, and we've got several copies there in the back, one for everybody. And Becky's going to be sitting back there at a table, and she'd be happy to autograph it for you if you'd like. So feel free to, before you leave today, just to stop by and say hi to her and get a book. And if you want her to sign it, she'd be happy to do that. So I guess Michelle's going to pass them out. So a couple people I want to thank before we wrap things up here real quick. First, Brent Slinkard's here today. He's been helping me a lot the last year and a half, 2 years, kind of handling marketing, and he helps put events like this together and helped me put the Lou Holtz event together last year. So he's been a great friend and a great help, so I really appreciate him being here and doing this for me. His friend David Goditis is here. He's the video man, and he's been doing a lot of helping me a lot with the Prepare Institute, videoing our classes to help train financial advisors across the country through there. So I really appreciate him being here and doing that video work. And again, I really appreciate Brian Bell deciding to join our firm and helping me with bringing his expertise on board to helping all our clients with the health insurance matters and things of that nature. Of course, I thank my wife for being here and helping me out with everything that we do through the practice. So again, wish you guys all a very Merry Christmas. I'm sure I'll be seeing a lot of you here before the next week or two before the year ends. Again, thanks to my staff here as well, Michelle Hunt and Debbie, for everything they do as well. And again, thanks very much for Becky being here and traveling all this way and entertaining us. So if I forgot anybody, I really appreciate it. Again, Becky is back at the table, ready for her to sign your books if you'd like. And I'm going to be around for a while. Brian Bell will be around for a while if you have questions for us. Again, thanks for coming. And there's plenty of coffee and tea and muffins back here left. Feel free to hang out as long as you want. And appreciate you being here. Thanks, everybody.